We are, of course, in the season of Lent, the second Sunday of Lent, and people often give something up for Lent. Sometimes people will pick up a good habit or forego a bad habit. Sometimes I think of it as New Year's resolutions. Take two. Let's try again. Hope it will stick this time. I know I did it growing up, and I know a lot of us do it. My family does it. It's great. But I think it's important to know that it comes from kind of Roman Catholic Church and its traditions of giving you things to do to help you to receive grace from the church. You make a sacrifice yourself to remind you of the sacrifice of Christ. You have to do a little extra, right, during Lent, but only for a limited time. Be good during Advent, then you can have fun at Christmas. Let it all go at Mardi Gras, but then be good during Lent, except on Sundays, and have fun on Easter. Right? It's sort of a start and stop thing, which kind of doesn't seem to fit with the New Testament message of being good right all the time. I'm sure Jesus and his atoning death on the cross for all sins of mankind appreciated me giving up soda as a kid, but I think it sometimes misses the point. I still remember I gave up soda, and I was probably like 7 years old, and there was this county fair, and I went with a friend of mine, Matt, and his dad took us to this place to get some food, and the sodas were like, 50 cents or something, and I said, well, I can't have any soda. I'm, giving up soda for Lent. I'll take that lemonade over there at that stand, which costs like $3, which was like $7 in today's money. I still remember the look on his face as he was trying to hide his eye roll as this kid said to him, I can't have any soda. I need that $7 thing over there. We naturally focus on our contribution to our faith, right? That makes sense, right? We're humans. But we often get in the way of ourselves, and it gets in the way of the main message of Christianity. The cross alone is our theology. The cross alone is our theology. This was stated by the Protestant reformer Martin Luther about 500 years ago. He said this because he realized how quickly Christians put all these other theologies up in front of the cross, other theologies and practices in addition to the cross that in effect take attention away from Christ's sacrifice for us and put the attention back on ourselves, put all the attention on our contributions. And he calls that the theology of glory. We prefer the theology of glory where the focus is on us as opposed to the cross where it's on Christ. The theology of glory thinks the things of man, as Jesus says in our gospel reading, while the cross is the divine plan. The theology of the cross puts us on our knees, giving thanks for the sacrifice of Jesus, while the story of glory is a human-focused one, focusing on our Christian life, our effort, our contribution, which distracts us from our own sins, our own problems. The cross in itself is an attack on human sin, right? That's what the cross is, and it's an attack, a victorious attack on human sin. And, well, like the Pharisees, we want to move past that to happier thoughts, our accomplishments, our deeds, what we're doing, to distract us from our misdeeds, what we're not doing, the things done and left undone. When we get to our gospel reading later, we'll hear how Peter actually gives Jesus constructive criticism to turn his cross plan into a glory plan. But first, our Old Testament reading opens a long time ago in a land far away, way back in Genesis 17. Abram and Sarai, elderly, still without the promised child, right before God changes their names. But they had been promised a child years before. They've been waiting. It's actually been 24 years since Abram and Sarai were promised to have a child. So years of doubt and waiting precedes today's reading. Of course, that tough lesson on God's timing, not ours. Then the covenant is now given again in our reading, and God says, "Behold, Abraham, my covenant is with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations. You shall no longer be called Abram, but Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you fruitful. I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant with you, between you and your offspring. As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her." Our lectionary skips over the next verses where it talks about requiring males to be circumcised. I'll spare you the details on that. Also verses about owning people and the Hebrews' right to the land in Canaan. A little controversial more now than usual. I will set those issues next to a 10-foot pole, and happy to talk with you after class if you have any questions about owning people, circumcision, or their right to the land of Canaan. But for us today, God changes Sarah's name, Sarai, to Sarah, which means princess. Abraham from Abram, from exalted one to father of a multitude. God is changing their names, changing them. This is a covenant of grace because there's no law yet for Abraham to follow. Right? There's no law yet. Moses has not been born. The Ten Commandments have not arrived yet. They just have to believe in God's promises. Very difficult and distant promises. But God will do it, right? God is at the center of this story. I will let you grow old, right? God lets them grow so old that they will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is God who brings life, that it is God who saves. This is not teamwork. God is the main character. God is doing these things. Their age, the ridiculousness of their age shows that God is the one in charge, not the illusion of human control and glory. Circumcision itself is the mark of God giving merit to the people, right? Calling them his chosen people. It's done in infancy. They don't earn it, deserve it. They don't even show faith. They're babies. They are brought into the family of God. No boasting. It's a gift. Just like salvation. Just like baptism, it's grace. Not because we're good enough or holy enough. The cross shows us that God saves. Where our glory story tries to put us back in the spotlight. And so this is why a few hundred years later, the Apostle Paul, in our New Testament reading for today, the Apostle Paul, in his most important letter to the Romans, cites this story that we just read. This story because he sees it as the perfect illustration of this gospel message. This gospel message that already comes under attack of people trying to add our glory into it. Try to distract from the cross back to us. Paul knows that we're workaholics and we want to put our work back into it. Paul writes, "For that promise to Abraham and his offspring, that he would be the heir of the world, did not come through law." In other words, it didn't come through us behaving according to God's law, our work, but through the righteousness of faith. For it is the adherents of the law For if it is the adherents of the law who are to be heirs, faith is null and the promise is void. In other words, if it's about us following the law, we're in trouble, as Jesus showed us with his teaching, as he showed up the Pharisees, as he showed us our sin. If it's about following the law, then we're out of luck. Paul says the law brings wrath, but where there's no law, there's no transgression. That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace and be guaranteed to all of Abram's offspring. It depends on faith so that the promise may rest on grace. This whole new covenant that Jesus made is on grace. Abraham believed, Paul reminds us, and that was counted to him as righteousness. The legal language, reckoned. Abraham just believed. and he was given righteousness from God. Our faith rests upon Christ's work on the cross, not us, not through the law, but through faith. So just as Abraham was saved through faith, not perfection, not obedience, but through faith, so are we. Paul knew then, and still true today, we want the glory. We want to be the main character. As they say online, main character energy. We want to put ourselves in the center of the story. Just as Abraham and Sarah laughed at God's outlandish promises of bearing children, they were still blessed with children. Just as Abraham and Sarah grew impatient with God's timing, had a child through Hagar, if you remember that part, they tried to take the wheel, take center stage, yet God still gave them a child. The covenant was given through God's power, not human obedience. But our workaholic nature doesn't like that story. We don't want to have such a minor role. Maybe religion was that way for you. It's all about obedience, obeying the law and the rules. The more scripture you read, the more quiet times you have, the more prayers you say, then the more God blesses you. That's how our minds just naturally work. That's the glory story. The more good things you do for God, the more good things God does for you. It's like an equal partnership, reciprocal relationship. Of course, we're not equal with God. The more sacrifices you make for God, the more God does for you. You obey, you get good things. Maybe that's how you were parented, right? Carrot and stick, threats and reward. But that only works as long as the pressure is applied. There's no freedom in that, no learning. I've heard many parenting talks and teachers talk about how obedience is this ultimate foundation of the parent-child relationship. I don't think so. You were disobedient, but God still has mercy on us. You were disobedient as a child, whether directly or passively, and your parents did not throw you out of the house. They were still your parents. The parent-child relationship is based on love, not performance. One-way love, beginning from the parent to the child. Despite mistakes, despite struggles, it's founded on love. Otherwise, it would fall apart immediately. Love holds together despite a child's misbehavior. Love holds a family together despite the mistakes, hurts, and problems. Love holds a family together despite a parent's lack of attention and presence in the life of their child. Or on the other side, despite their controlling and smothering nature. All of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, as Paul says. We've all fallen short of our own hope and potential. We've all fallen short of someone else's hope for us. As it is written, I have made you the father of many nations. In the presence of God in whom he believed, Paul writes, God gives life to the dead, calls into existence the things that do not exist. We forget that God is able to call things into existence that don't exist. God creates out of nothing. Abraham was good as dead, as Paul says. God made him alive, because that's what God does. Sarah was way past childbirth, but God brought life out of what we thought was dead, because that's what God does. God raises you up out of the impossible, out of your regret, despite the prayers you didn't say, despite the choices you made incorrectly in your life, the good deeds you didn't do, the resolutions you failed, the people you disappointed, and the life you didn't live. God still makes new. God doesn't work with healthy people. Right? Jesus came for the sick, those who are in need of a physician. And that's why we can rest upon faith. Faith is a gift to revive us when we're down, when we've failed our promises, when we've disappointed others. Faith is there for us to rely upon. Because the whole agreement, the whole gospel message, Paul is telling us, rests upon faith, not works, so no one can boast. He uses that word, boast. No boasting. Because we didn't earn this. And we don't hold it. God does. We want the glory story, as I've said. We want the focus on ourselves, our goals, our desires, our input, our contribution, our truth, our share. But sometimes that distracts from our problems, the things that we need to work on. The cross lies before us. The cross reveals our problems, drives us to our knees in faith. I think the absurdity of the Abraham and Sarah story equals the absurdity of the cross. Finally, in our gospel reading, another absurdity, we read in the Gospel of Mark where Peter tells Jesus how to run his ministry. There's the human glory story. Peter telling Jesus how to run his ministry. Jesus talks about dying and getting arrested, and the apostles think, this is crazy. This is not how God should do this. This is not what the Messiah is here for. Why? What purpose would that serve? Don't choose defeat, Jesus. Choose glory. Win the battle. Take over Jerusalem. Peter wants the glory story too. The human-created story. The human-centered story of victory and political power. That'll save us, right? Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed. And after 3 days, rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Jesus says Peter is thinking of the things of man, not of God. He says, "Get behind me, Satan." And Satan, if you remember, the role of Satan is to tempt. Peter is trying to tempt Jesus not to do what he's been called to do, as the devil tried to do to Jesus in 40 days in the wilderness, tempting him away. He's called to suffer for us, to die for us. Peter wants the glory story. Jesus and the armies will roll up to Jerusalem, kick out Herod, kick out Pilate, the Roman legion, become famous. A human kingdom. The things of God versus the things of man. The cross versus human glory. The cross is not as exciting. Sometimes it's not going to be made into that best-selling novel or the Netflix drama that Peter wants. But it works. And it lasts forever. Jesus responds to our thirst for human glory and says, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it." This is not a modern self-help story. Deny yourself. He says, take up your cross. The cross, if you remember, is an instrument of execution at that time. It's not something people wore around their necks. It was an instrument of death. Die to your human aspirations, die to your human glory, and live for Christ. To follow Jesus is a cross-shaped path, a cross-shaped life. Dying again to our human hopes and dreams. Bearing your cross is not, a difficult path, or a difficult person, or troubled, ailment. Bearing your cross is letting die the human hopes of glory in exchange for a cross-shaped life, God's glory for you. A cross-shaped life of service to God. So this Lent, let us trust in the cross. Let us trust that we still need that hard wood of the cross so that we can have redemption, so that we can have healing, so that the focus can be on the God who sent his Son to save us. God who sent his Son to bring new life out of death. Amen.